Cool. Let's go home. Just kidding. You're very brave to come out on a night like tonight. You could have been home on a lounge, warm soup, TV, slippers. I'm glad you come home because I think by the time we're done, you will have had a good overview of Western philosophy. Let's do a real quick summary about where we came from. The Western philosophy is Greek in its foundations. Remember that? So Socrates is normally where we say it began, but there was philosophy before Socrates, notably a school headed by Heraclitus, who said you can't jump into the same river twice. In other words, the whole world is in flux. And the other school was headed by a bloke called Parmenides, who said everything is stable and eternal, and everything is in a species and a kind and so on. So basically everything is in flux with one school, and the other is everything is ordered. And where philosophy went was after Parmenides. So we've got a whole history of trying to explain how everything we see that appears to be in flux comes from something that isn't. Does that make sense? So, one of the early shifts as well is we saw that philosophy shifted from being about wisdom to being about knowledge. Do you remember that shift? And so we had, by the time we got to Aristotle, he said the highest part of the soul is reason. So, and that's picked up in Aquinas as well. The other great shift in the early days was how Christianity went from being an underground, whoever heard of it, sort of movement, desperados drawing little fish in the sand. Do you understand that side? That was it. When it was an underground movement, it was a way of kind of indicating to each other that they were Christian. I always thought when you saw that on a car, it meant it was a ratbag driver. The origin of that, by the way, this Greek word is a Greek word that means fish. It just means fish. But this was the tricky bit of it. It was Jesus Christ, God, Son, Savior. So, Jesus Christ, God's Son, our Saviour, fish. So that's what it's all about. You really needed to know that. But the point was that this went from being a little underground movement to the official religion of an empire. So if you can just get your head around that, it's just astonishing what happened. With all the problems that came. So anyway, medievals, let's get to it. Now if you thought we were fast last time, wait till you see what we're doing tonight. This is rocket ship stuff, but we'll get through it. So we're going more or less from the Reformation up to about the First War. That's our period. And in philosophical circles, that's called modernity. And, sorry?
What did you say, sir?
In philosophy, that period is called modernity. So you have ancients, medieval, modernity, and after the wars, you have post-modernity. And next week is post-modernity. And I'll be showing you how philosophy drove itself up a blind alley, essentially. Because philosophy in our day is in a bit of a blind alley. So I'll explain to you how that happened and why we are where we are. And then the last 2 weeks, we're going to do 2 weeks on Buber if you're still travelling with us. And each of those weeks I'll give you text if, the week before, if you're up for a little bit of reading. Okay, so let's go. First of all, these movements too, I've made it look like this happened in tiny little lumps. First we had rationalists, then we had existentialists and so on. It didn't happen like that. It's actually quite mixed up. But most philosophers react to the one that went before, saying he's wrong, and I'll tell you why. So there is flow, but it's not at all tidy, and everybody affects everybody else, and so on. But a good teacher doesn't give you conclusions as if they're arguments. But I'll be giving you a bit of bad teaching tonight, because we just got to fly. So the first school, I guess you could call it philosophy, or it's not a school, it's lumping a bunch of philosophers together, is in a movement called Rationalism. So Rationalism is a philosophy that says all knowledge comes from certain innate ideas. Okay? We'll start with Descartes, who you must have heard of. Okay. Descartes says this little Latin phrase, cogito, ergo sum, which is, I think, therefore I am. Some of my relatives have turned that into, I drink, therefore I am. Descartes said we need to start philosophy again. We've got to start all over again. And he said we need to find some certain basis for it. So he said, I can doubt pretty much everything. So I need to throw all that out, because I need to start from a certain place. God is doubtful. All the stuff that came to us through church and through scholasticism, which is Aquinas and on, all of this is too doubtful and too wrong. So he said, I'll doubt everything. And he said, the only thing that I cannot doubt is that I'm here doubting. And that led to, I think, therefore I am. The only thing I know is I'm a thinking thing. All right? This is a massive, massive shift. And I don't know if you can hear the shift, because in medieval times, the primary question of philosophy was, what is true? That was the primary question. The primary question in modernity becomes, of what can I be certain? That's a shift. So Descartes says that I'm a thinking thing. What does that shift tell you? The shift from where the primary question is what is true to the question of what can I be certain. What does that shift say to you?
It's internal.
Yes, exactly. So the shift has become, and this gets stronger when we get to these characters. Let's say this is a table, such a good drawer, right? Well, you have a person contemplating this table. What do you know?
You know your perception.
Sorry?
You know your perception.
Exactly. Once we get to modernity, what you know is here. So the link between the knower and the thing known is severed. And it gets crazier than this, but that's a very important thing for you to kind of grab, because the discussion from here on out is largely about the head, and the link between the knower and the thing known is largely lost. Is that a worry? Spinoza. Spinoza's a tad depressing. Some of these people are a tad depressing. I'll just check I don't want to give too much of a bum here. Spinoza said God and nature are exactly the same thing. Now, listen, why do you think philosophy has struggled at this time to find certainty? What's that all about, do you think?
Well, in top turmoil.
Second?
Well, in top turmoil at that stage.
It was in vast change, but I suspect what it's about is it's always an attempt, most of this philosophy is an attempt to escape what came before. And what came before, in the medieval ages, was an absolute hold upon the Western culture of Christianity and the authority of kings and bishops. So, kings got their authority from bishops. All of that was tied up in the philosophy of Aquinas. In fact, the official teaching of the Catholic Church today is sort of 70-80% still Aquinas. So the whole is massive. And it's not bad, but so Descartes starts again and says we need to find certainty. Of what can we be certain? Can you remember that our mate Aristotle, jump to Aquinas, who is Christianising Aristotle in about the year 1200. He made this distinction, which I think is the most unhelpful thing in the whole world. He made a distinction between what's natural and what's supernatural. And that changed the course of modernity. So what was natural became the subject of science, and what was supernatural became the subject of theologians. So you needed revelation for that, but for this you needed a brain. So he said the natural order is that which is intelligible by the ordinary human power of reason. Now I think that distinction is extremely unhelpful, but nevertheless that's what happened. And so now we have a whole bunch of the world who are fighting to try and find a science of humanity that doesn't need God and doesn't need kings and all that. Does that make sense? So mind you, Descartes was deeply religious. It's really funny. The other philosophers bagged him and other theologians bagged him for being godless, because the ground for certainty was, I think, there I am, therefore I am. And they thought that was a godless thing for him to say. And it was picked up by lots of people who were very happy to have a godless kind of philosophy. But in fact, when he died, he was tutoring the Queen of Sweden, whose name was Christina, I think. And when he died, she abdicated because the Constitution of Sweden meant that only a Protestant could be on the throne. She abdicated to become a Roman Catholic. And the only Catholic she had real contact with was Descartes. So, it's a kind of nothing's ever clear. That's a rule. Spinoza said that God and nature were two expressions for the same thing. So there's no God who is a person. It's just nature is a kind of a machine, and that's God. So Spinoza says that the idea of free will is a total illusion, because this is mechanical world. He said people who believe that they have choice are people dreaming with their eyes open. He made a distinction, this is probably the thing he's most famous for, this is Spinoza. He made a distinction between active and passive emotions. He said, you have no choice but to feel the passions you feel. He said, they just come because they just come. But he said passive emotions is when they just come and rule you, and active emotions are when you understand why they come. Now, that may not seem very groundbreaking to you, but it actually was, and it made room in due course for Freud. Yeah. So it's kind of a big deal. Anyway, interestingly enough, you know, over here we've got Aristotle saying reason, animal sensations, and kind of plant bodily way to divide the soul. Spinoza divides the soul as, he says we have opinion, reason and intuition. And what do you think he thinks is the highest way of knowing? Intuition. Because this is moving in. You know, everything is becoming individuated. So the highest way of knowing is your intuition, for Spinoza. Are there any Jewish people present? Oh, well, his first name is Barak, which is blessing. And so for him, he said, he knew what his name meant. And he said that the ultimate blessing was to have active emotions, which is not to mean you have any free will about it, but you understand, you know, why that comes. We'll skip Leibniz because he's boring. Let's go to empiricism. Empiricism says that all knowledge comes through the senses. All right, so rationalists, it comes through innate ideas, and this is it comes through your senses. John Locke said you were born tabula rasa, meaning blank slate. But when I was studying social work, we were taught that children were born tabula rasa. That was what we were taught, and that children were formed by the environment. Now, that comes from John Locke. I don't think people teach that anymore. But you can guarantee John Locke didn't have children. Because children are not born tabula rasa, right? I reckon kids are born and the person's there, and you can modify that to some extent, but that little person is there. So anyway, he says we're born tabula rasa, and all the information we get about ourselves comes through our senses. But let's start with Berkeley. He's cute. He says there is no such thing as material substance. So the table isn't there. There isn't it? Because you have no information about the table at all. He says the proper object of sight, for example, is not the table, but is light and colour. What you know is light and colour. You can say nothing about the table or any other object. Now, this guy reacted in some ways to some of the philosophy that was materialistic and that said, if you can't weigh it and measure it, it's not there. He said, well, it isn't there. He said there are only spirits, and what he meant by that is conscious subjects. These guys say that knowledge comes through the senses, right? But they all actually agree that the senses are incredibly unreliable. One of Locke's favourites was Berkeley actually used to think using wax. You know, he'd say you'd see wax as a solid, and then you'd see it as a liquid, and you know, your senses were telling you this was two different things, and it's not really. But one of Locke's favourites was if you have a hot bucket of water here, put your hand in it, and a cold bucket of water here, and put your hand in it, and then you have a lukewarm bucket in the middle, and then you put both your hands in that lukewarm bucket, then your hands tell you that that water is both hot and cold. So therefore, the quality of heat doesn't belong to the water. fun, isn't it? And, yeah. So, that's a bit exciting. Some of these characters, like Berkeley said, that it not only would heat not belong to water, but he said qualities like size and weight don't belong to objects. You wouldn't want to send him down the shop for a big shovel rather than a little one. Hume was a Scot and incredibly influential. He was the first one to start to say that philosophy is about language, actually. Very early starter, but we'll not dwell on it much. So what we know is the quality of what we directly experience. He said reason is the slave of the passions.
Which one was that?
This is where Hume. Yeah. Reason is the slave of the passions. You can see a movement already. And Locke was incredibly influential, not only as a in the philosophy of empiricism, but also in political philosophy. If you read much Locke, it's not long before you can really see that the American Constitution more or less comes out of Locke. This is stunning. His political philosophy is incredible. I'll give you a quick taste. He was a doctor, by the way. He was the doctor of Lord Shaftesbury, who started the Whigs. I don't know if you know your English history very well. In his letter concerning toleration, this is incredibly important from the American Constitution. He said, earthly judges cannot properly examine the truth claims of competing religions. And if they could, if they tried to enforce it, it would have the wrong effect, because you can't enforce belief. So coercing religious conformity leads to discord more than allowing the diversity. Now, today we just, we yawn at that, but that was revolutionary, and it's incredibly of influence to the fathers of the American Constitution. So Locke said, just going back to epistemology, remember that word epistemology? It's the study of how do you know what you know, which dominates modernity. So Locke says we have simple ideas. We are born with a brain that has simple ideas, and from those simple ideas we construct complex ideas. So once again, when you say you know something, what you know is your idea. Once you swallow this, it's really hard to get out of it. If you remember back to the medievals, or remember, go back to the ancients. For Plato, everything aspired to the perfection of the thing. So, I don't know if I should not have Plato or Aristotle, but so for Plato, up here there was a realm in which perfect things existed, and everything on earth shared to some extent the perfection of the perfect and aimed for that perfect, and everything had real sharing in that perfect. So there's a real table wherever the forms are, and this table aspires to the perfection that is in the world of the forms, and that table has real existence in the forms and in here and in here. That table exists in your head. The architect draws it and says this is what we're going to make. That has real existence here. and that is shared directly in the thing that's made, and both those things aim for the perfect. So that's ancient philosophy. So in modern philosophy now, this is gone, and what you have is your idea. All right. Enough. Let's go to idealism. These are mostly Germans, and reading these idealists is the hardest reading you'll ever do in your life, I reckon. It's just rigorous, to the intellect kind of reading. It's important, it's influential. You feel very superior once you finish the book because you got through it. But it's a little bit like having a chicken sandwich with the feathers still in. But these guys were highly influential. The German idealists tried to perfect the philosophy of everything, tie up the whole world and just have it all covered. So Kant, he says that the human brain has certain categories, and we think according to those categories. And so we know the world according to categories. And those categories include things like space and time. Now, we've had a lot of philosophy about what time might be, and I can tell you, we still haven't got a clue. We're good at measuring it, but nobody actually knows what it is. And if you do some research, the best philosophy will give you is time belongs to your head. It's a category in the human brain. Now, that's Kant. Kant's incredibly influential in his own way. He tried in some ways, he's pretty brave, he tried to reconcile these two kind of schools of thought. But he's kind of, by this time the Enlightenment, which is this age of reason, is being called, or Kant called it, the age of dare to know. So there's a sense of we can know stuff. He took himself out of isolation. He took himself out of all of these social groups and buried himself in a house for 10 years. Literally 10 years. He had friends try and pull him out of the house and so on, and he wouldn't be in it. And he emerged 10 years later. And that book did turn out to be incredibly influential. So, he says we can't access a thing in itself. You cannot transcend the categories. Right, so you're stuck with your idea of the thing. Describe something to me, here it is. Well, I describe according to the categories in my head, and I can never transcend those categories. What do I actually know of the thing in itself? Nothing. What I know is the categories in my head. Okay. He wrote about ethics as well. He said to be ethical is to treat a person as an end rather than a